The Franciscan family, first, second and third orders, in their diversity and many different forms, the secular institutes and other movements which refer to Francis celebrate the 8th centenary of the approval of the Franciscan rule of 1209. It is a calling to mind of the origins of the Franciscan charism.
Over the past 800 years, the first dozen friars received together with St. Francis by Pope Innocent III have turned into thousands. That's what Pope Benedict XVI told some 2,000 male and female Franciscan religious gathered at Castel Gandolfo, following a meeting of their chapter in Assisi this past week. The Pope noted that the Franciscan family has from the very start been obedient to the Pope and authentically spiritual, while many other movements have opposed the magisterium. The Pope asked Franciscans to become the living Word, to continue their spiritual renewal, and to help the Church's pastors bring more and more faithful into the fold. This Pope, now as in the past, said Benedict, expects much from the global Franciscan community.
Favorendo l'approvazione della regola.
Francis, rebuild my church. Thus spoke the crucified Lord to Francis of Assisi in the ruins of the church in San Damiano in the year 1205. In response, literally, Francis rebuilt the material church. Francis was ridiculed as a madman when he went from house to house to collect supplies to rebuild the church. But Francis later realized that the crucified Lord had called for the restoration of the faith of the church of the 13th century. During this extremely trying period, his only two restoration tools were his passionate love for the crucified Lord and neighbor. Francis loved life, nature, and above all, he loved people because they mirrored the love of God. Francis was the first religious to be a missionary in the church. He could not be content with saving himself in a cloistered setup prevalent at that time without being a leaven, bringing the joy of the gospel to society. He not only experienced the call of God to be with him, but was also committed to the world. He diffused the same spirit in his followers. In 1209, Francis wrote a very simple rule of life for himself and his companions who chose to join him in his mission. The main points in his simple rule were to live according to the gospel in poverty, to be genuine preachers, to be penitent at all times, and sustain themselves by work and by begging alms. Francis wanted to have this simple rule approved by the Pope. So Francis, accompanied by his 11 companions, went to Rome. At the first meeting, Pope Innocent III dismissed Francis, but later in the night, the Pope had a vision of a palm tree sprouting between his feet and growing into a fine tree. The Pope realized that the fine tree was Francis, whom he had turned away. However, the cardinals were reluctant to accept the Pope's intention to approve the rule. The Pope had a second dream in which he saw a poor man holding up the walls of the falling Lateran Basilica. The Pope recognized the poor man as Francis, and the Pope gave Francis and his companions a verbal approval to live by the simple rule. The text presented to the Pope, the proto-rule or the first rule, was a plan and a description of a lifestyle rather than a regulation. It was revised, detailed, and enriched down through the years, first under the form of the regular non-bullata of 1221 in its different versions, and then definitely confirmed by a pontifical text, regular bullata 1223, and recalled by Francis in his testament 1226. Although it concerned primarily the group of friars, as can be seen immediately, it is open to all states of Christian life. The celebration of the 8th centenary of the approval of the primitive rule, the proto-rule, is first of all a celebration for the friars of the First Order. who through their profession commit themselves to making it the basis of their personal and fraternal life. The core of this text, to live the gospel in simplicity and joy in all its richness, is addressed to all Christians, to all men and women of goodwill, and in a special way to the children of St. Francis. In fact, barely 1 year later in 1212, Clare of Assisi was inspired by rule and life of Francis. In 1252, Clare took the rule of Francis almost in its entirety in order to set up the order of the poor clares. Besides, very soon after, some individuals and group of men and women, while living their own state of life in family or profession, were attracted by the Franciscan gospel proposal. To these, Francis addressed 2 letters, known as the Letters to the Faithful. These letters, as well as the contents of chapter 23 of the regular non-bullata, constitute the basis and the spiritual reference for what would become in time the Franciscan Third Order. Thus, the Franciscan family, right up to the present time, constitutes of 3 branches. The first order of the Friars Minor, distributed in 3 obediences, the second order of the Poor Clare Sisters, and the more numerous group called the Third Order, composed of the religious brothers and sisters of the Third Order Regular and of the secular brothers and sisters of the secular Franciscan Order. We must also add to this the many secular Franciscan institutes which have appeared in the recent centuries. All explicitly refer to the gospel inspiration of Francis and accept his spiritual texts as the basis for their legislation. This sign of the universality of Franciscan gospel proposal exists among the Anglican and the Lutheran churches, of communities of men and women who claim to be and are of a Franciscan inspiration. Many men and women beyond all these defined juridical confines are interested in the Franciscan charism, study it and are inspired by it. All are friends of Francis.
Jingling on a yokirikaza. Jingling on a yokirikaza.
Tracing back the origin of the arrival of the first Franciscans, we made a trip to Malacca. With the discovery of the sea route to India in the 16th century, the Portuguese came into this country. Alfonso de Albuquerque, he led an expedition to Malacca and conquered Malacca in 1511. On board the ship there were 200 strong military men, and among them there were 8 Catholic priests, 1 a Dominican, 1 a secular priest, and 6 Franciscan friars, and all of them served as military chaplains on board. Thus these Franciscan friars were the first Franciscans to set foot in this country, that is in 1511. This is the actual place the Portuguese landed when they conquered Malacca, and here you see the crane, the only sign or symbol that is available to show that this was the exact port in which they unloaded and loaded their goods. As soon as the Albuquerque conquered Malacca, he built a fortress known as the Formosa. What we see here is the ruins to the entrance to the Formosa. And over the other side we see another entrance, also a ruin, which is known as Santiago Bastion. The Albuquerque had a great love for Our Lady. Immediately after he erected the Formosa, he ordered an erection of this church and was named as a Church of the Annunciation of Our Lady. It was built in this area. We do not see the church. What we have is a facade, the main entrance to the church. The first Franciscan friars did not stay long in Malacca. In October of 1511, they followed another Portuguese, Antonio de Abreu, in search of the Spice Islands or Moluccas. In 1581, the suffragan bishop of Malacca, by the name of Don Joe Ribeiro Gallo, a Dominican, invited an Italian friar by the name of Joe Baptista de Pizarro to cater for the spiritual needs of 80 Portuguese families who settled in the suburb towns of Uper and Hilir. The Italian friar was invited in the year 1582, built a monastery on the spur of Bukit China, and that monastery was called the Monastery of St. Francis of Assisi. Initially, there was also a chapel nearby, which was known as the Hermitage of the Mother of God. This place came to be known as Monte Sao Francisco. After the erection of this monastery, Pope Innocent XIII was duly informed by the bishop of this establishment, which in 1584 was passed to the Portuguese friars when the Italian Franciscan friar left Malacca for missionary work in China. This monastery, sometimes referred as the Monastery of Madre de Dios, suffered attacks by the King of Johor in January 1587. The final siege on the monastery and the Mount of St. Francis was by the Sultan of Aceh in 1620. On 21st October of the same year, the Governor of India arrived with a fleet, and the Archenies took to flight during the night. Finally, the Portuguese governance in Malacca fell to the Dutch. In 1646, Malacca came under the Dutch rule. As a result, Catholicism was prohibited in Malacca, convents and churches were pulled down, and only this church was left on St. Paul's Hill and was used for their own purposes. That was the early presence of the Franciscans in Malaysia-Singapore region. Now let us find out how and when the Franciscan family members arrived and established themselves in Malaysia and Singapore. At St. Anthony's Church in Kuala Lumpur, the Fraternity of the Third Order of St. Francis of Assisi was initiated by MEP Father Viii Herman on the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi on 4th October 1927, a year after the 700th anniversary of the death of St. Francis. The fraternity was established with the authority of the Superior Regular Friar Minor at AJMIR, Rajputana, India, with 6 brothers who were made novices. Owing to the distance from St. Anthony's Church, fraternities were established in various parishes throughout the Archdiocese of Kuala Lumpur and the Diocese of Penang by the OFM Capuchins and Diocesan Fathers. From 1927 to 1977, fraternities of the Third Order were present in 10 parishes in West Malaysia, giving them all the reason to celebrate its Golden Jubilee in a grand manner on 9th October 1977. The new rule for the Third Order of St. Francis of Assisi was approved by His Holiness Pope Paul VI, and on apostolic authority it was decreed that the Third Order be known as Secular Franciscan Order as from 24th June 1978. The first known secular Franciscan in Sabah was Thomas Lee, who was given the habit of the Third Order in Hong Kong on 4th October 1937. In Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, OFM Friar Rupert Dawson sought permission from Bishop Simon Fung of Kota Kinabalu Diocese to establish a fraternity in the diocese for the few isolated secular Franciscans. Now, there are 9 fraternities in Sabah, of which 4 are emerging fraternities. In Singapore, the Fraternity of St. Elizabeth of Hungary, attached to St. Mary of the Angels Church, was erected in 1976. The Fraternity of St. Clare's was established in 1988 under the spiritual direction of the FMDM, and the FMM initiated the foundation of the Fraternity of St. Margaret of Katona in 1988. Later, the Fraternity of St. Joseph was erected. Secular Franciscans are involved in group apostolic work, reaching out to the poor and the sick, and have individual apostolic work teaching catechism, visiting the sick in their homes, and are involved in parish activities. The Congregation of the Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak, the SSFS, were initially known as the Little Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak, initiated and instituted by Right Reverend Monsignor Edmund Dunn, MHM, who was Prefect Apostolic of Sarawak from 1897 to 1933. His vision was that local girls could also play caring roles and contribute to the growth and work of the church. The Little Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak was instituted on 10th January 1928 with the objective to engage themselves to follow the rule of the Third Order of St. Francis. The Sacred Congregation of Propaganda Fide had already approved the canonical erection of the congregation in 1926, and the Franciscan Missionaries of St. Joseph, FMSJ, the then partners of the Mill Hill Fathers, was responsible for the training and directing the pioneer local sisters of this new congregation. The Holy See granted the congregation full autonomy in 1955, and on 8 January 1957, the Little Sisters of Sarawak was officially established as a diocesan order in the Vicariate of Kuching, Sarawak. Within the next 15 years, the Little Sisters had spread all over Sarawak, with 6 more convents established in the outstations of Sibu, Longsan, Sarikei, Muka, Marudi and Miri. On 10th December 1971, at the renewal chapter held at the Mother's House, Kuching, the congregation's name was officially changed to Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak, SSFS, signifying an indigenous identity. Until 1971, the local sisters worked alongside the Franciscan missionaries of St. Joseph in the fields of catechetical work, ran and taught in the primary schools in quite a number of mission stations, managed the home of the aged, maternity homes and clinics, serving the local population. When the last batch of the Franciscan missionaries of St. Joseph's sisters left Syria, Brunei in 1978 and Sarawak in 1981, the mission in Brunei and Sarawak was entrusted to the Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak. In June 1997, the Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak ceased serving in Brunei after 19 years of service there. Appreciating the past and in heartfelt gratitude to God, the Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak celebrated the 70th anniversary of its foundation in 1998. From January 2001 to November 2006, the Sisters of St. Francis of Sarawak extended their mission to West Malaysia, particularly in the Archdiocese of Kuala Lumpur and in Setiawan in the Diocese of Penang. Today, the sisters are actively involved among the poor, the youth, and the needy in the areas of education, evangelization, pastoral, and social. As at mid-May 2009, There are 89 final professed sisters, 7 temporary professed sisters, and 3 novices. The Franciscan Sisters of the Immaculate Conception are a local congregation founded in 1936 by Monsignor August Watcher, a Mill Hill missionary from Austria, Prefect Apostolic of North Borneo and Labuan from 1927 to 1945, with Mother Rose Chanley, a Franciscan missionary of St. Joseph from England, as the co-foundress. After 5 years of initial formation under the guidance of Mother Rose, the first 4 candidates pronounced their first vows at St. Mary's Church, Sandakan. The FSIC was founded primarily, though not exclusively, for the local church in Sabah. The sisters carry out their mission to all in need through catechesis, education, homes and hostels, and pastoral care. Today, there are 118 members, including 3 postulants, 6 novices, and 8 temporary professed sisters, spread out in 33 small communities in 4 dioceses. In response to the invitation from Most Reverend Archbishop Murphy Pakiam of Kuala Lumpur to assist mainly in the pastoral care of Bahasa Malaysia-speaking people of Sabah and Sarawak, presently working and residing in the Archdiocese of Kuala Lumpur, 2 sisters arrived at St. Anthony's Church on the 16th January 2005. In the same year, 2 sisters of St. Francis from Sarawak also responded to the same invitation. Since then, the team of Franciscan Sisters of East Malaysia has ministered to 1,322 families, 1,481 children, and 1,875 youths. The beginning of the congregation of the Franciscan Missionaries of the Divine Motherhood, the FMDM, goes back to 13th January 1896, when a group of Franciscan Third Order secular members were inaugurated into a diocesan religious institute in Hampstead, England. They were then known as the Franciscan Missionary Sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis for Home Mission. In 1947, a new constitution under the new name of the Franciscan Missionaries of the Divine Motherhood was approved by Rome, making it a congregation of pontifical right. In 1949, 3 FMDM sisters first arrived in Singapore when they had to leave their mission in China. The first local vocation was from Ipoh as early as 8 January 1951. And this was followed by many young women from Singapore and Malaysia. Upon the invitation of late Archbishop Michael Osomandi of Singapore Malacca, the FMDM sisters provided their medical expertise to the Tan Tock Seng Hospital and the Talfaga Home for Leprosy Patients from 1949 to 1963. A training school was established in February 1950 to prepare suitable educated young women for a certificate in tuberculosis nursing. In 1961, the first and only Catholic hospital in Singapore was opened, the Mount Alvernia Hospital. In 1993, the Assisi Hospice was opened in the grounds of Mount Alvernia to provide home care service and daycare service for adults and children suffering from cancer. In 2000, St. Anne's in Sengkang was opened. Here, the sisters are engaged in clinical pastoral care, spiritual direction and retreats, parish ministry and migrant ministry. In Malaysia, the sisters started Our Lady's Hospital in September 1963. In 1983, the sisters were asked by the Brothers of Mercy to help with the management and nursing duties at Hospital Fatima in Ipoh Gardens. They were at Hospital Fatima until 1997, after which the sisters left Ipoh. A new community was re-established in Ipoh in 2008. In 1973, a cancer hospital known as Mount Meriam Hospital was built on the bishop's land at Fetters Park in Penang. The Mount Meriam Hospital, managed by the sisters, is now equipped with state-of-the-art facilities to treat cancer outpatients and inpatients, especially those in their terminal stages. In 1989, Archbishop Soto Fernandez of Kuala Lumpur invited the FMDM sisters to serve the poor of Port Klang attached to St. Anne's Parish. In 1990, 2 sisters were assigned to Port Klang, and in 1991, a community of 5 sisters set up St. Joseph's Convent. In 1993, the first learning center was set up in St. Anne's Parish grounds, followed by the EduCare in 1997, which was set up in a rented small terrace to provide tuition for poor children. In 2004, Bishop Paul Tan, SJ of the Malacca Johor Diocese, invited the FMDM sisters to the diocese. There are 23 sisters in Singapore and 21 sisters in Malaysia. The Franciscan Missionaries of Mary was founded on 6 January 1877 by Blessed Mary of the Passion in Uti, India. From its inception, the institute was dedicated to universal mission. The sisters are called to be committed to the service of evangelization, to go everywhere and bear witness to the love of God for all people. When the institute first began, there were only 20 sisters. But at the time of the death of Mary of the Passion in 1904, there were more than 2,000 sisters working in 23 countries. Today, the Institute numbers 7,074 sisters in 76 countries. In Singapore, the history of the FMM began in 1953 with the expulsion of missionaries from China. From simple beginnings, as a dispensary based in a Buddhist temple, other ministries followed. In the 1950s, Petaling Jaya was one of the new villages created during the emergency period to protect the people from communist insurgents. It was poor and there was need for medical, social and educational services for the people. Thus it was that Sir Michael Hogan, Attorney General of the Federation of Malaya, went to Rome in January 1953 to appeal to Mother Mary Margaret of the Sacred Heart, Superior General of the FMM, for a foundation in Malaya to serve in these fields. On 2nd March 1954, 4 FMM arrived in Petaling Jaya. This team of sisters consisted of a doctor, a midwife and 2 nurses. 2 months later, they were joined by another 2 sisters, a doctor and a nurse. A maternity home was established, which is now the vibrant Asunta Hospital. The sisters also established dispensaries in the villages around Kuala Lumpur, a training center for overage girls, and later primary and secondary schools also for girls. Today, these ministries have evolved and new ones taken on. For example, the Foster Care Center is now a learning center for underprivileged children. The FMM are also involved in parish work, in catechetical formation, youth ministry, and care of migrants. The FMM came to Kuantan in 1955, Kota Baru in 1962, and Terengganu in 1968. In these towns, the sisters support the small community of Catholics and run kindergartens and hostels. The Capuchins from the United Province of India arrived in Malaya as early as 1954 upon the invitation of late Archbishop Michael Olsomendi to cater to the spiritual needs of the local Tamils and Malayalis who were in dire need of a shepherd who spoke their language. The pioneers were Father Dennis and Eusebius from Amala Ashram, Trichy. In 1960, Bishop Dominic Vandagan invited the Capuchins and they were temporarily assigned to St. Anne's Parish in Port Klang. They were later entrusted with the parish of Our Lady of Lourdes in Klang. On 18th September 1962, the Capuchins established their first friary, St. Michael's Friary, in Batu Arang. In order to centralize their mission work, the friars relocated the friary from Batu Arang to Cheras on the 28th March 1965. The new friary was christened on 4th April 1965 as Gethsemane Friary. By the end of 1965, 20 new missions were entrusted to the Capuchins, who also ministered to the lepers in Sungai Buloh and preached missions around Malaysia and Singapore. In 1972, when the vast united province of India was divided into 4 provinces, the Capuchin house at Gethsemane came under the Amala Anai province of Tamil Nadu. A formation house, St. Felix of Cantolis, was opened in Penang. Later, upon the request of Bishop Emeritus James Chan of Malacca, Johor Diocese, a retreat center was established in Ulu Tiram in the Malacca, Johor Diocese. This jurisdiction of territory was transferred from the Amala Anai province of Tamil Nadu to the province of Philippines on 1st July 1995. Later, on 31st October 1996, the Malaysia-Singapore delegation was canonically established, and on 11th February 2004, the Malaysia-Singapore delegation was established as a Custoday. Today there are 15 friars involved in parish ministry, conducting retreats and parish missions. It was on 28 March 1957 that the first order of the Friars Minor landed on Singapore soil. As a result of dialogue between Rome, the leaders of the local church, and the Franciscans in Italy, America and Hong Kong, an international group of Franciscan friars were brought to Singapore in 1957. They established a sociological institute for outreach, research and publication of documents in an effort to counter communism in the region. On August 16, 1958, Archbishop Michael Osomandi of Malacca, Singapore officially declared the presence and ministry of the Order of the Friars Minor in the Archdiocese. Within 2 months, Rome issued a formal decree on the canonical establishment of this new community. The friars entered into a 25-year pastoral contract with the Archbishop to serve in the underdeveloped Jurong Tuas region. In 1960, Friar Thomas de Pascual, Friar Bonaventure Tung, and Friar Fulgence Gross joined the community. While engaged in pastoral work, they were also involved in translating Christian literature. The friars taught at Nanyang University. Friar Rupert Dawson was appointed as the first chaplain of the Catholic Students' Apostolate in 1984, a post held by the friars for 23 uninterrupted years until January 2008, when the Archdiocese took over the chaplaincy. The initial chapel built by the friars in the fishing village of Tuas had to give way for another venue in Taman Jurong. In 1971, a parish center was built in the new Boon Lake Garden, and in 1976, a new parish church of St. Francis of Assisi was erected nearby. In 1982, with the increase in number of local diocesan priests and upon expiry of the 25-year pastoral contract, the friars handed over the running of the Boon Lake parish to the Archdiocese. One of the pioneers, Friar Bonaventure Tung, stayed on to serve as pastor of this parish. In 1970, upon the request of Archbishop Osomandi, the chapel next to St. Anthony's Friary was elevated to a parish church and given the name the Church of St. Mary of the Angels. This was also the time when the first Australian friars came to serve in Singapore. In 2001, the order started St. Anne's Mission outside of Kuching, Sarawak, which served 50 mission outstations spread over a geographical area approximately the size of Singapore, with a largely indigenous population. In 2008, two friars began a filial house in the Malacca, Johor Diocese and attended to the pastoral needs of St. Teresa's Parish in Masai, and a year later extended to the nearby St. Joseph's Parish in Plentong. A regional Franciscan formation program initiated in Singapore almost 25 years ago produced 20 local friars from Malaysia and Singapore, and now serve full-time as priests and brothers. There are now 13 young men from Singapore, Malaysia and Australia undergoing initial formation. Today, friars serve in pastoral and administrative roles in parishes as well as teaching staff, as chaplains in tertiary institutions and in schools, and serve the disadvantaged through a variety of ministries, reaching out to deaf persons, migrants, prisoners, drug addicts, and others at risk. The Franciscan Sisters of the Holy Infant Jesus was founded in the year 1906 in Sashi, Hubei, China by Bishop Modetus Reverex OFM. The OSF strive to live in the humility of the infant Jesus and the Franciscan spirituality. The congregation of the Franciscan Sisters of the Holy Infant Jesus first arrived in September 1999 to serve in the Diocese of Malacca, Johor upon the invitation of Bishop Emeritus James Chan. The sisters have since then rendered their services only in this diocese among the Chinese-speaking parishioners. Let us give thanks to God for having given us a simple rule to live according to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have, at a distance of 8 centuries, the grace to be the inheritors of this simple rule. And from now on, we have the serious task of being those who must continue the simple rule.